Okay, before we did some videos and I talked about color and I talked about the importance of doing a color study instead of just looking in a textbook and seeing what a textbook says that you should expect when you mix certain colors, that you should actually mix certain colors and see what you get. And the reason why is because from brand to brand the results will be different, and from year to year the batch will be different even within a brand. And I also talked a little bit on those videos about the difference between transparent colors, semi-opaque colors, and opaque colors. And just to illustrate that, I want to show you, these are some of my paints that I have. And you'll see that I have several different blues, several different yellows, several different reds, okay? But they are basically primary colors. I also have a giant tube of white, which we will talk about in a moment. I want to show you what else I have accumulated over the years, which don't really get used, but I accumulated them because as a beginner in painting, you kind of listen to what other people say a lot instead of using your own brain. And a lot of other people say a lot of stupid things, and you don't figure out that they're stupid until you've done it. So I have a lot of browns, okay? And you'll see people who are advising you on colors and they'll recommend a brown. It's the stupidest thing you can get. You totally don't need it. Why don't you need it? Because you can mix your own brown. So there's really no point in buying one. Each one of those tubes can cost as much as 40 bucks. So the less tubes the less variety of tubes you get, the more money you're going to save, obviously. So anyway, back to the previous videos, which I had mentioned, I had discussed using a different model than the ones you find in your textbooks as far as like the color wheel. Because the color wheel suggests that if you mix a yellow and a red, you're going to get an orange. And presumably you might interpret that to mean that if you mix 50-50 red and yellow, you're going to get an orange. But you don't. And the same thing is true with green. And the same thing is true with purple or violet or whatever you want to call it. If you mix 50-50, you're actually going to get either a very bluish purple, or you're going to get a very reddish orange, or you're going to get a very bluish green. And the reason why is because there's dominance there. And I want to illustrate that with a three-dimensional model that I created to explore color before I knew that that was going to happen. So I knew that there were three colors. Why are there three colors? Well, there's three colors because the human eye detects color by a type of cell called a cone cell, and there's three different types of cone cells. And each different type is attuned to a particular wavelength of light, or actually a range of wavelengths of light. And the sensitivity peaks at certain points for each one of these different types of cone cells. And there is also a segment of the range which a particular one of these three cone cells is dominant in. So for example, the cone cell which is associated with the color red, the other two cone cells don't cover that range. And the same thing is true with blue. The cone cell that is attributed with blue, the other two cone cells don't cover that range, but the blue cone cells do cover the range that dip into the area of the green cone cells, which are in the middle, and the green cells do dip into a little bit of the blue range and a little bit of the red range. So there's peak, and then there's those other things. But anyhow, that's basically what it comes down to. You have three different types of color receptive cells in the human eye, so we see three different colors. That's why. And from those three different colors, all the other colors that we can see can be constructed. Why is that? Well, because when you have color frequency, which is affecting multiple cones at once, like instead of just one, it's two or three, all three, then you're going to get a combination. And well, you have also a different number of the different type of cones. So you have 2% of the photoreceptive cells that can see blue, and you have roughly, 30% or so that can see red. And then and we're talking about light here, we're not talking about paint. You have the remaining amount, which is 60 some odd percent, which is going to detect the green area. Now in paint it's very different. It's a very different situation. But it's related. And the reason why it's related is because of this. as I said before, we see light. So light carries a wave. It's a frequency, and it has a wavelength. And there's different wavelengths are going to be interpreted by these different receptors, which are sensitive to various wavelength ranges, to the perception of various colors. Okay, so if we have light that strikes an object and bounces off of that object, like for example this canvas, if light hits this canvas and bounces off of this canvas, here in this unpainted area where it's white, all of the light, all of the different frequencies of light which the human eye can perceive will bounce off of this section and reflect. But if we had a black area on here where what we see when we look at that area is blackness, it's because of the fact that all the different frequencies of light that we can see are striking that color and being absorbed into it and being transferred to heat, and nothing is reflecting. Nothing that we can see anyway is reflecting off, and therefore we see nothing. So when we see red, that's because all of the different frequencies that are bouncing off that section are perceived by the cones that are sensitive to red light, and the rest of them are being absorbed into the material and being transferred to heat. And this is true with all the different colors. This is the difference between the light, seeing color with light and seeing color from the reflection of light. So this is the reflection of light. When we're mixing pigments, we're dealing with reflective light. So we're dealing with pigments that are going to absorb certain frequencies of light and reflect others. And that's the reason for the distinction. So back to the color chart. I designed a three-dimensional one. Why? Because there were three different colors, and I knew that you can mix any two at a time, and then you can take any combination of two that are mixed and mix that with the third one. And I wanted to know what happens, when you mix these two in equal proportions. What happens if you mix all three in equal proportions? So that would be the tip of the pyramid. And what happens when you're somewhere in between, for example. So let's go to the orange side. Here's your yellow pole. Here's your red pole. Here's where it should be orange. Orange is actually here because the results are skewed, because red is so dominant. Why is red so dominant? Well, it could be a lot of different reasons. It could be part of what I said before about the number of cones that are sensitive to red light. It could also have something to do with the properties of the pigment used by the manufacturer. It could be a lot of different reasons. But what I do know is that it's dominant. So for me to actually get the orange that I expect to see here, like you would see in a light spectrum, I actually would have to add in much more yellow, much more yellow, much more yellow. So here's what I got when I mixed 50-50. And if I mixed that with 50-50 with more yellow, I would get this shade. And if I mixed that with 50-50 more yellow, I would get this shade. And if I mixed that with 50-50 yellow, I would get this shade. And presumably, if I continued that process, I would approach the original yellow, just as I clearly do here when approaching red on the other side. But it's skewed. Same is true here on the green side. My yellow, my blue, here's my green. This is a very bluish green, and I don't even have a yellowish green. I don't have a lime green here because I would have to add a tremendous amount more yellow. Same thing is true on the purple side. I have my red here. I have my blue here. That's probably purple, but there's several steps more of me adding red that I would have to do to get to round this out, to get this, more step by step closer to the red. Now, if I moved up toward the other color, the complementary color, which would be here, it would transition up and up and up, and I would see how that would do. But it didn't work out because I didn't know how many steps there would be between the red and the blue, or the red and the yellow, or the yellow and the blue. And so later on we would work on that. But before I got around to that, I developed another chart. And so the other chart is this one here. And on this one I have the same problem, which I already noted. But what I did do here is I explored what do these different colors do when you add white to them. And that's for several reasons. Number one, because I wanted to know. But number two, because when I was on the purple side and I was it's getting very dark. As you add yellow to purple, it gets darker and darker and darker. And blackness is over there somewhere, but it's hard to figure out, well, where exactly is blackness? Because when you have so many darks so close together, it's hard to distinguish one from another. But when you add white to all these darks, you can actually see what they are. And so I found I was getting closer results to gray from this particular batch over here, which is closer to where the purple was. You know, like I said, this is very skewed. The purple was actually right beside the red in this particular chart. Here's the 50-50, and then I add red, and then I add red, and then I add red. Okay, so this is closer to purple, or it's somewhere between here and a few more steps maybe even. But here's where I found my gray when I started adding white to the samples that I got. So as I add yellow, and it got darker moving up, and then I add white to that, I started getting my gray. So that's how you make your black. So you don't ever need to buy black. Look over here at the orange section. When I have my orange section and I start adding blue to that, it starts to move through brown, right? So if it starts to move through brown, what does that tell you? It tells you you don't need to buy brown paint, right? You can buy 3 tubes of paint, your primary colors, and you can mix any color you want, so you certainly don't need to buy those other ones. They cost more money, right? And you don't even know if you're going to need them in your painting, just because some idiot told you would. But what you do need is these primary colors. Why is that? Because there's no non-primary color that you can mix to get a primary color. So we're going to stop this video here, and in our next video, we'll talk about some other things.